Take me out to the ball game. Take me out with the crowd.
Hello, I'm Charlie McDowell. Welcome to a conversation with the producers of baseball, Ken Burns and Lynn Novak. Thank you for joining us. Now the first question. After exploring such a subject as the Civil War, what possessed the two of you to spend the next 4 years of your lives on baseball?
I have been interested in all of the films that I've worked on a very simple question: who are we? Who are we as Americans? What is it like to be an American? And the Civil War provided a profound and definitive look at what that question is all about. But I think if you want to know a little bit about the country that we became after the Civil War, you need to study baseball. It's one of the clearest constants that we have in our life, and surprisingly, there is as much tragedy and as much emotion mixed in between the lines of baseball as anywhere that we found.
I think also we felt very strongly we could perhaps broaden the definition of what history even could be. It doesn't have to be just wars and presidents and who was elected when, but perhaps the story of how we spend our free time and who our heroes are, and something about our popular culture that could help us understand even more about the American drama than those other subjects. And it was a very exciting idea to broaden that sense in the classroom and on the television.
Mm-hmm. Lynn, were you a diehard baseball fan already when you came to this?
I wouldn't say exactly diehard. I liked the game a lot. I didn't know as much about it as I do now, for sure. I knew a little bit about who was playing, and I knew a little bit about some of the history. But what I found is that as I got more involved in the research and meeting some of the people who care about the game, some of our great interviews, I developed a deep, deep love for the game and understanding of it that just keeps growing as time goes on. It just rewards you. The more you learn about it, the more you love it.
She knows more about baseball than anyone else in the world now.
She does?
I think so, yeah.
Well,
Don't ask me any trivia questions,
well, certainly, I wouldn't insult you, not for a minute. Well, we'll answer then, either or both eventually. Why is it such a great game?
It's the greatest sport that's ever been invented. When you look at the other ones, principally football and basketball, they're kind of like ritualized warfare, combat that occurs in the moment. But this is a great game that just spreads out in space and in time, and that's a very important thing to understand. This is a game without a clock. Every other sport has a clock. This is a game in which the defense holds the ball. This is a game with a rigid set of rules, but every playing field is different from another. This is a game in which things can happen in foul territory. You can win or lose a game in foul territory. This is a game that's as much about losing as it is about winning. You know, the greatest heroes of the game fail 7 times out of 10, and we still send them to Cooperstown. That's a 300 average.
Lynn, apart from whatever else you were going to say, don't let me tell you what, how about some people that would argue that this wonderful game that he makes into a poem, and you seem to feel the same way about, how about the people that say it's too slow? Everyone stands around all the time.
Well, I think if you understand the game, and the strategy is complicated, and I have to admit I don't always understand exactly what strategy is being considered at any given moment, but the more you do begin to understand the strategy in those little interstices in between the action, that's actually, as Dan Okrent says in our film, that is the action of baseball, and that's why if you understand the game, you're waiting there to see what kind of pitch is he going to throw. Is that runner going to steal second? Where are the infielders? Where are the outfielders? And you're kind of trying to figure out with the players what's happening. And I've gone to so many games with my father, who was a big baseball player in high school, and he's constantly screaming, what are they doing? They should be bunting, you know, and so the fans can get involved in the game that way. And if you love the game, it's even more exciting because you have time.
And the key word in her response is my father. You see, when you talk about other sports, you just say, I remember when Michael Jordan did this, and that was it. But when you talk about baseball, you say, I remember when my father took me to this game, or my mother was the baseball fan, and we did this. And then all of a sudden you realize that the experience of baseball isn't even just the sport and all of these wonderful inner dramas that go on, but a huge connection to memory that I can connect to my father and to his father and all the way back, so that in addition to being a kind of broad mirror of the country, it's also a very kind of personal family album in which we might measure the passages of our days through our experiences as ballpark. And now I give it to my daughters, and it goes on and on and on. Plus you go to a game and you can sit there and just have a beer and watch it and maybe vaguely remember who won or lost. You can go and you can pay attention and root for your team passionately and know who's up, or you can know everybody's batting average and keep score, or you can actually sit there and know that that was a curveball and that the next pitch has to be a breaking ball of this kind, and all of these experiences can occur at the ballpark.
Yeah, you mentioned scoring, but as a little kid, I couldn't understand who were those professors in the stands keeping utterly foreign little squiggles.
Right, it looks like Sanskrit after a while, doesn't it?
It's very difficult. I covered baseball in Roanoke, Virginia once and didn't know how to keep a box score, and so they sent a child along to help me. And it sobers you when you do that.
There's a really amazing moment in our film just before Jackie Robinson comes up, where we really think this is one of the great moments in American history in a way. Doris Kearns Goodwin, a historian now of a great writer, said that as a little girl her father had her keep score of the games that he would miss, and she would dutifully record the games, listen to him on the radio, and he'd come home and she'd relate the games, completely unaware that he could find out in the next day's paper what had gone on. And she feels that in some way she became a historian. It's a historian from scoring and a historian because of the connection to her father, and that's a great thing.
That is.
And
Doris, go ahead.
One of the great ways that baseball connects through keeping score and the numbers, which is this whole sort of poetry of its own, is that through the statistics and keeping score, we can actually measure the players of today against the players of 100 years ago in a way that actually matters and makes sense. And a 300 hitter in 1900 is the same level of player as a 300 hitter today, which is magical almost. So I think.
Well, I've heard you, Lynn, and Doris Kearns Goodwin in the same day talking baseball, and I'm old enough and something bad enough that I didn't know. Are there a lot of women that now really are into baseball as something cultural and a game and all that?
I think there have been for a very, very long time. Some people say that the beginning of radio brought women into the game because the play-by-play announcer could explain the game to women at a level they could understand. They didn't have to have their husband or boyfriend explain it to them, and they felt sort of involved, and that's probably the 30s. I know my grandmother, I heard, used to listen to the baseball games in the afternoon in the kitchen in New York. So I think and that's about in the 30s. So I think it's probably starts from that time. And I have a sense, I don't really have any proof of this, but I think that women probably find baseball more alluring than football, basketball, or hockey. It's not violent. You can relate to the individuals out there. There's more stories. There's sort of more narrative and more drama in a way, I think, than the other sports.
You really make the positive points, and I like just listening. But I wrote down here before we started that baseball has a dark side. Really, the Black Sox scandal and such tough guys as Ty Cobb and McGraw. I mean, there's something dark there. Is that serious? Is that a characteristic of baseball to have a darker?
It's a characteristic of American life to have a dark side.
And human life.
And I think that why we're drawn to this subject is that it is so complete a mirror of how we are in our larger society. And I think that while we are drawn to the game because it's so glorious for all the reasons, we don't want to ignore the dirt that's under that rug. We think that you can lift it up and bring out some of that dirt and talk about it, and it actually makes that tapestry look even finer in relief. I mean, that when you reach a great and glorious person in the game, knowing the sort of odds that beset baseball players and human beings alike is quite interesting. So we want to know about Ty Cobb and his virulent racism, his scary personality, and what kind of inner demons drive a man to the kind of performance. And in baseball, perhaps the greatest there ever was. Or John McGraw and his furious need to win at all costs. Or what propels Babe Ruth, or a Jackie Robinson, or a Curt Flood, and people that will come to know over the course of the series.
And I think baseball players have had to face some of the same temptations that we have to face in our lives: drugs, money, corruption. They're all there, and the Black Sox scandal is certainly evidence of that. These are, as someone, I think Roger Angel says in the film, you have the same proportion of heroes, villains, and fools in baseball that you do in ordinary life. So it's not unimaginable that you would find a Joe Jackson or a Ty Cobb, any more than you would in your friends or family, unfortunately.
Baseball also has a humorous side, very much so. Give me some examples of things that just spring to mind and make you grin.
It's really curious. This is a game in which thinking is not a big part of it. In fact, your head gets in the way. The hardest thing to do in sports is to hit this little tiny ball that sometimes looks the size of an aspirin tablet with this skinny piece of wood that sometimes feels like a broomstick. And thinking really gets in the way, but for some reason this is the thinking person's sport. This is a game that appeals to language, and then after that to character and humor. So you get to meet Rube Waddell, who was the craziest man who ever played baseball. People used to hold up bright shiny toys and puppies from the stands to distract him, and his teammates had to physically restrain him once from chasing a fire engine while he was pitching on the mound. Or Casey Stengel, you know, with his great humor, is just incredible. He couldn't stand dead air, Robert Creamer said, so he talked like this, and he said you could do this and do that, and then all of a sudden these pearls of wisdom came out. Or Yogi Berra, who said, if you don't go to their funeral, they won't go to yours.
Does any of those stick in your head?
Well, there's a sense that the stories get passed on from generation to generation, especially, I'm looking at Walter Johnson here, you know, stories about people who couldn't hit fast pitches. And there was a story about Walter Johnson that, you know, he pitched so fast that batters were just terrified, and someone asked the umpire, you know, was it hard to call the balls and strikes against Johnson? Did the batters second guess you much? And he said, no, not much. Not only were my eyes closed, their eyes were closed too.
Well, you know, I was thinking about teams on the road, and baseball teams are off with themselves. You finish playing with these guys, and you get on some train and ride too far, and they tell stories and they make up stories, and I get a sense that you all are into that.
Well, when you get to be a billionaire, Charlie, you'll leave hundreds of millions of dollars to your college, because for some reason those 4 years with all of those people changed you. Well, baseball is like perpetual college. You spend all this time, your whole professional career as well as your educational career, with the same group of people trading the same stories, carrying on in the same generational way, so that you hear these same stories, not just about Johnson, but about Gomez, about Feller, about Koufax, on up to Clemens, and the same stories going on. And it has that same sense of, we've called it a fraternity for too long, but it is about coming together across time.
This series explores how baseball sort of holds us all together, like it's a kind of global village. We win together, but don't we also lose together?
One of the reasons why we've chosen the subject is because well before the global village, we've had a kind of common language in our republic. We could say that we had a common language of our Constitution and the way it influenced our laws and the way we behave. And in our leisure time, we've had this common language of baseball. And I don't mean speaking about it, but the experience of baseball. And that's been around. It's helped to define community, so much so that when the Dodgers leave Brooklyn, it really just sucks the air out of that community. And I remember George Plimpton in our film referring to the theologian Michael Nowak said a town like Brooklyn could lose its symphony or even its church, and this is a theologian talking, and not its ball club, that the ball club had something to do with the identity of the people. And here is this space that you go to that's sort of outside the grid. You know, when you get into a ballpark, you can't exactly remember how the streets are anymore. You're sort of turned sideways. You're now facing inwards to each other. You're not passing each other on the streets. And there's somebody that's fat and somebody that's tall and somebody that's old and black and white and male and female. And you're all there, and things happen together. And there are so few things that we do together.
I'm just trying to think as you're speaking about why it is that baseball, as opposed to other sports, really give us that sense of community in a different kind of way. And I think it may have something to do with the fact that you do lose a lot of the time, and that the losing, I mean, Brooklyn, that team was terrible for 20 years. And that's, as Doris Goodwin says later in the film, we hardly ever won, but it didn't matter. That wasn't about winning. And I think football and basketball, it's very much win, win, win. And when the team wins, they go out and they riot and things like that. And baseball, you never see that, because there's something about the shared sense of loss that you can still love your team even though they lost, hopefully, that does bring us together.
Well, you go a step inside, move back inside. Do you feel that this series has changed you, really? Are you changed? Are you more connected to everybody else?
I really feel that very strongly. I had, as I I sort of had a vague connection to baseball through my father a little bit, but I didn't really understand it, and I couldn't have a long conversation with, say, my father-in-law, my doorman, a taxi driver, in great detail about why the Yankees are still in first place and where will they be later and should they pitch Jimmy Key tomorrow and that kind of thing. And that's a superficial thing, but it's a way to connect with people that I probably might not have had much in common with, and it's sort of a shared experience. It was like a door opened and I found out, oh my goodness, this is what all these people have been talking about all this time. I had no idea. It's wonderful.
It's a family album. You know, you flip through and you go, oh, there's Uncle So-and-so, he was very mean, and this person was kindly, and this person showed you how to do this, and this person was a great role model, and she was not so great. And you look at it, and it's about belonging to a vast and very, very complicated family.
Yeah,
what effect is this family experience supposed to have on me, the viewer? What do you wish it would do for me, the viewer, or to me?
I would hope that in the course of seeing the film, you would begin to sort of join in an American rhythm. I mean, when we think about our history, as Lynn said, we normally think about presidents and wars and generals. That's what it's about, you know, and that's what the Civil War is about. But we're suggesting that there might be a kind of inner history that we have that may, in fact, in the totality of our existence, be much more important. And that I think coming to know the places that we've been as a people over the last 150 years, about race, about labor, about the nature of heroes versus celebrity, about things that matter very much, that this sport actually delivers. It isn't brain surgery. This is not metaphysics, but there's something about the game that summons up an American experience and goes, I think, a certain distance in helping us to understand who we are, where we've been, and obviously you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been.
There are very few institutions left in our society, I think, you know, schools, things that used to bind us together, neighborhoods, politics, have all become fairly divisive, and in sort of institutions that really separate us, and perhaps baseball is one way that you can agree to disagree. And, you know, as Stephen Jay Gould said, nobody dies. It may be a tragedy for you because your team lost, but there are no bodies left on the ground when the game is over, hopefully. So
That's
I don't know.
interesting. Was there a moment, Lynn, in the making of the series that just for you was a special moment, a memorable thing? If I asked, what's the main thing you remember about making this?
There were several. I learned an enormous amount. I was sort of learning seat of the pants all the way. But I did a lot of the interviews for the film, and I went on the road sometimes by myself. Ken was busy in the office or in the editing room or whatever, and I had to go out and interview Mickey Mantle and Hank Aaron, and that was really exciting and scary sometimes, if they were going to respect me and think I knew about baseball enough to ask them questions. And the most extraordinary moment that I had was going to Kansas City, one of the first trips I went on by myself, and knocking on the door of a man named Buck O'Neill. And he let us in. I mean, he knew we were coming, but he didn't really know who we were necessarily, but he was very gracious, and he let us interview him. And as soon as the interview was over, I just felt that our film had been enriched in a way that you couldn't describe, really. I just knew something really special had happened. It was very, very exciting.
Have you had another thought on that subject?
Well, I agree, and it's Buck again, because we went back to him to talk to him again, and there is that moment in each film where you intellectually join a project at the very beginning. Yes, I'm going to do baseball after the Civil War. And then there is a moment in which your heart catches up to the project, and you go, yes, this is what I want to do. This is what I should be doing. And Lynn brings back an interview with Buck O'Neill, and we go back again and we do another interview, and then another, and we begin to feel like what we've been talking about, what we have been paying lip service to is really true. And there's a wonderful moment in which each project, the rhetoric is overtaken by the reality, where we said that this is in some ways a sequel to the Civil War, but then when you suddenly realize the poignancy of the question of race in baseball speaks to a much larger question of race in our American and human experience, then you've got history running on all cylinders, you've got filmmaking running on all cylinders, and we're engaged. And it's really a moment of pure joy where all of a sudden you look around and these inanimate photographs, which for months have been bedeviling you. You can't make the Merkel boner of 1908 come alive. All you've got are still photographs, and all of a sudden you figured out how to tell the story. Jeff Ward has written a new line. Lynn's dug up a new photograph, and you just say to the editors, how about this way? And then you say, my goodness, for that brief moment it comes alive. And that's essentially what we live for, I think.
Pretty much.
Lynn, baseball has progressed, and we have it all here, and you must be able to sense it. What do you like about contemporary baseball, or dislike, or both? Or?
I'm probably one of those few people that doesn't mind the players getting a lot of money, first of all. I would much rather see Ken Griffey Jr. make $20 million a year than some owner who doesn't do anything except, I don't know, hire him. So that doesn't bother me at all. I do think both sides probably forget the fans some of the time, and I think that's a little bit of a problem. But I love going to the games, and I think there's unbelievable talent out there. In spite of the big offense and problems with pitching we have, there's unbelievably great people out there playing this game. It's very, very exciting. It's just, you can't beat it. I don't know, I love it.
I don't think
Speak to the same.
You know, we came across a quote early in the production that was in our first inning about a guy complaining about how they don't play baseball the way they used to back when he was a boy in 1858 and 1857, and he's writing from 1869. And you begin to say, wait a second, where have I heard that before? Each generation in the history of this country has said, oh, you know, baseball's ruined. You know, we don't play it the way we used to. The players are greedy. The owners are firing their managers every year. There's gambling scandals. You know, there's drug abuse things. Boy, I wish it was this pure game. And we begin to realize what a trap nostalgia is, but also how wonderful that this game is. The more it changes, the more it stays the same.
Our time has run out. I want to thank you both for coming and sharing your experiences with us. And you can bet that I will be watching as baseball continues, and so will a lot of other people. I'm Charlie McDowell. Good night.
Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I never go back. 'Cause it's a root for the home team. And if I don't win, it's a shame. 'Cause it's a 1, 2, or 3.
Channel 2's local presentation of baseball is made possible by our members in partnership with Gillette, makers of the Gillette Sensor and part of American baseball history since 1939. The Gillette Company, world-class brands, products, people. With The Gap, and with Raytheon Company, in defense and commercial electronics, aviation, appliances, engineering and construction.
There's been a lot of times in this ballpark that you had a lot of thrills. You see that red seat up there? I was here when Ted hit that ball.
Ted Williams, one of his most historic shots, was hit here on June 9th, 1946. If you look out into the center field bleachers, you'll see all green out there except one seat, and that's painted red, and that's 502 feet from home plate. Williams hit a home run there off Freddie Hutchison of the Detroit Tigers. 502 feet, that's a pretty good poke. Yawkey asked for that seat to be painted red so it would be remembered as a spot that Williams hit his longest home run.